Denver sending migrants to Aurora's motels, displacing longtime residents to the streets, is not sitting well across the city line.
He is creating homeless people, and maybe he doesn't care because he's creating homeless people in Aurora and not Denver, but I care very much.
Denver's latest decision to move even more migrants, and a word about whether the new mayor is keeping his promises. Being rich and powerful shouldn't be enough to get you around the rules, even for the man who wants to significantly change Colorado's elections. And the renewed importance of Hanukkah at a time when Jewish people in Colorado and around the world are facing increased threats.
Jewish history is a series of events, some of them triumphant, some of them tragic.
Tonight on Next. Denver's mayor says the city is out of space to house migrants, so Denver is setting them up in Aurora's long-term motels. After our Mark Salinger reported that that's been forcing people living there onto the streets, Denver promised to make that right.
The city of Denver's newest migrant shelter is not even in Denver. 400 migrants now live at this Quality Inn in Aurora that displace long-term residents like Joe Sacetta, who spent several days living in his car after he was kicked out of the hotel.
The housing cost is so high, it's hard for us to find a place to live because it's so expensive.
After we started asking questions about Coloradans being forced out in favor of migrants, Denver says everyone displaced in Aurora will now be allowed back at the hotel.
Some cities are less supportive than others, but I have to give my hat off to Aurora. They have been open. Mayor Kaufman's been a great partner, and we're looking at long-term partnerships there.
While Denver doesn't technically need Aurora's cooperation to rent rooms from a private hotel, it doesn't exactly sound like Aurora is on board with the plan, like Johnston says.
Maybe talk to the city council, maybe talk to the entire governing body, because I can tell you, none of my colleagues knew about this either. None of them.
Republican City Councilwoman Danielle Jurinsky says she was never told about Denver sending migrants to her city. Republican Councilman Curtis Gardner says Johnston is making Aurora deal with Denver's problems.
Playing games like this with people's lives makes it really hard to trust other jurisdictions and gain that regional cooperation.
Even an official statement from the city of Aurora refutes Johnston's claim that the city is a willing participant. Denver's decision to transport migrants to Aurora was Denver's decision alone, the statement said.
And we have to add 300 units in 24 hours. We have to look wherever we can to add our next set of units.
While Johnston says Aurora was the only spot his city could find hotel rooms on short notice, Denver is now shutting down a migrant shelter in the city and converting it to a homeless shelter.
To address one problem and create another problem, you're really just shuffling people around at that point and playing games with people's lives.
Gardner says housing the homeless at the Rison Hotel in Denver would get Johnston closer to hitting his goal of housing 1,000 people by the end of the year. Housing migrants there would not help that goal. Johnston calls it a better long-term use of the hotel.
So we heard that story last night with Joe, who'd been pushed out of a hotel that he'd been living in for months when the city of Denver leased all the rooms to migrants. Important to note that Joe works as a chef for Danielle Jurinsky's restaurant, which she owns. After the story, Joe got a call from the regional manager of the Quality Inn. He says he'll be allowed back at the hotel and will be given a free room for a week. The city of Denver says they told the Quality Inn to not push out any more people to make room for migrants. But at the end of the day, Kyle, that decision is still up to the owner of that hotel to say yes or no, we will or will not do that.
And as we talked about here last night, if the city of Denver walks in flashing cash at places that house vulnerable people, they know what's likely to happen, which is displacement. So they move these migrants in.
Right.
And the migrants are on a 14-day clock, which is what the city's doing so that they can get federal aid to help people. What happens when 14 days runs out?
That's what the city council members want to know. Is the city of Denver going to send buses to say, hey, you've stayed 14 days in Aurora, now we'll take you back to Denver, and in theory push them out onto the streets there? Or will the city of Denver just say, hey, your 14 days are up at the shelter, you're out on the streets in Aurora?
And as we've talked to migrants, they mainly tell us they're trying to learn the area, they're trying to learn a
They
neighborhood.
want to work.
They're trying to find jobs. So if they're being moved place to place, that makes it a lot tougher.
It's not helping.
Mark, thank you. Denver Mayor Mike Johnston came in promising to address homelessness with more compassion and more competence than the last administration. Denver forcing vulnerable people out of long-term motels and onto the streets in order to make room for migrants. That is not compassionate, and it is not competent. Denver faces an unprecedented challenge of meeting the mayor's self-imposed deadline to house 1,000 people living on the streets by the end of the year at the exact same time that migrants are still flowing here from the southern border. But complex challenges do not excuse a lack of compassion and competence. Displacing vulnerable Coloradans from their housing in favor of migrants, that also plays directly into the hands of the people who are framing this as a false choice between helping the homeless or migrants, not both. The Johnston administration additionally runs the risk of discrediting its entire effort to house 1,000 people, because now journalists and critics can rightly ask, well, how many people did Denver make homeless in the process? This appears to be a one-time example of displacement, and one that the city is trying to fix after we called attention to it. But for a new mayor who promised more compassion and more competence in addressing homelessness, this could be a big setback. Colorado Democrats at the Capitol are deeply divided over the Israel-Hamas war. Now, one Democrat who apologized for not denouncing Hamas says party leadership suggested that he should consider resigning over it. Representative Tim Hernandez did not. Hernandez was appointed to the State House by a vacancy committee in Denver in late August. In October, Hernandez attended a rally in support of Palestine. It was the day after the October 7th Hamas attacks. Video of Hernandez arguing with a counter-protester went viral. Hernandez also liked several social media posts that appeared to mock the attacks on Israel. House Republicans called for his expulsion. When Hernandez put out a broad condemnation of war, Democratic House leadership said wasn't good enough, that they were disappointed that he didn't explicitly condemn Hamas. Representative Hernandez eventually released a video with that apology and condemnation. In an interview this week on CityCast Denver, Hernandez revealed that Democratic House Speaker Julie McCluskey told him to consider resigning.
I was put in the House District 4 seat in the state legislature not by the Speaker of the House. I was not put there by my colleagues. I was put there by my neighborhood. And I represent my community over the interests of the Capitol.
Hernandez will be up for re-election next year. Democratic leadership did not respond to our questions today about whether Speaker McCluskey suggested that Hernandez resign. A wealthy businessman wants to radically change how Colorado's elections work. Some think it's so that he can get elected governor. Whatever the reason, he has to go through the same process as anybody else who wants to put something on the ballot. Politics guy Marshall Zellinger shows us how that works.
Thank you for the question, and we are taking it under advisement. Thank you for the question. We'll take it under advisement. Thank you for the question. We'll take it under consideration.
Okay, the entire meeting did not go this way, but it sure felt like time stopped. Like the clock in this committee room where the legal staff for lawmakers try to understand the intent and objective of citizen-proposed ballot issues. There are 3 proposals to overhaul Colorado's election system, submitted by these 2 voters and pushed by former DaVita CEO Kent Thiry. The proposals require candidates to collect signatures to get on a ballot, with unaffiliated voters being allowed to sign. Primaries would consist of candidates of all parties running against each other, with the top 4 advancing to the general election. General elections would include ranked choice voting, where you can pick multiple candidates and rank them in order of your preference. State House and Senate vacancies would be filled by special elections, and ballots would be counted by 11:59 p.m. on Election Day.
The term as soon as practicable.
David Meshke is the attorney helping with the ballot issues that would put in the state constitution a loose deadline of counting ballots by 11:59 p.m. on Election Day or as soon as practicable.
11:59 is not a hard and fast deadline. The accurate reporting of election results is always the goal.
Being a larger county and the size of my county, that is just not physically possible for all of the eligible ballots on Election Day that are cast to get to us in a timely manner.
County clerks like Republican Weld County Clerk Carly Koppes currently have until 8 days after an election to count any ballots that were dropped off in the wrong county and to allow voters to cure any issues like a missing or discrepant signature. And ballots from military and overseas voters can still be received and counted up to 8 days after an election. Meshke acknowledged those deadlines are not something the ballot proposals intend to impact.
The only thing that ends on Election Day is your ability to cast an eligible ballot. It should not be a deadline for me to count eligible ballots.
For Next, I'm Marshall Zellinger.
So the next step is for the state title board to decide if this ballot issue meets state law by dealing with only one issue at a time. It looks like that could be a sticking point for that total election overhaul. The Colorado Republican Party failed to convince
county-level Republican leaders that they should reject last month's election results as rigged. Just 5 county chairs out of 64 took the largely ceremonial action of not certifying the election. Now, the state party's lead election denier is comparing Colorado's Democratic Secretary of State, who is Jewish, to Hitler. Secretary of State Jenna Griswold certified the results of the election this week, and with support from all 64 county canvass boards. Those boards are made up of each county's clerk and recorder and the local political party chairs. The Colorado GOP's Ballot and Election Security Committee chairman, former state rep Ron Hanks, told the canvass boards not to certify the election. He says the system for auditing results is rigged. Only 5 out of 64 GOP chairs chose not to sign off on their local election results. It happened, though, in Boulder County, El Paso County, Jefferson County, La Plata County, and Larimer County. Their elections were still certified because it only takes a majority on each board to do so. Hanks and the Colorado GOP have not offered evidence that the election was rigged. And now that their county-level GOP leaders didn't fall in line, Hanks is escalating his rhetoric about Secretary Griswold.
It is outside the scope of their duties because their duties have been narrowed down to praising and hiling the Hitler in the Secretary of State's office.
That was Hanks on the Chuck and Julie podcast. Griswold, we should mention, has faced physical threats for her election work. Several men have been convicted of crimes for their threats against her. Colorado GOP Chair Dave Williams recently hinted at violence to come, telling a far-right podcast that he predicts civil war if so-called election fraud continues. Well, it is a busy week for one of Colorado's newest elected officials. Inglewood School Board Director Devon Williams gets sworn in tonight. And tomorrow morning, he's in court on a felony auto theft charge. Williams' legal case could have been dealt with long ago, but he had an outstanding warrant for years. In fact, police were pleading with him during his campaign for school board that he needed to turn himself in. He did just before Election Day. Williams has prior felony convictions for theft and auto theft, but that doesn't stop him from serving on a school board. Only a child abuse conviction automatically disqualifies somebody under state law. The Inglewood school superintendent says if the community wants a recall, then they'll have to go through that process. Williams has said on social media that he has learned from his past. He now describes himself as a serial entrepreneur and lobbyist. We checked. There's no state record that he has a single lobbying client. And his several business ventures include hosting a number of now defunct sexually explicit websites.
There's lots of excitement. There's lots of stress.
Oh, I get it. I don't even know how I would go about picking which wolves to bring home to Colorado with me. And as Denver's Jewish community prepares for Hanukkah, they say the holiday's message resonates now more than ever. That's it. Oregon says if Colorado wants wolves so bad, come and get them. Colorado has just 26 days to begin reintroducing gray wolves on the western slope. That is what voters statewide ordered a few years ago over the objections of locals. So parks and wildlife workers are now going to Oregon for the literal pick of the litter. Colorado struggled to find a state willing to give us some of their wolves until Oregon stepped in as a supplier in October. But Colorado Parks and Wildlife has to go and capture the wolves and bring them back. So teams traveling to Oregon in the coming days where they'll scope out the wolves, then hire helicopter crews to tranquilize them so they can get a health check.
The capture crews will do a quick health check on the animals, make sure that they've got good legs, good feet, good eyes, good teeth, so they're healthy animals. But if they don't meet those criteria, if they have broken limbs, things like that, we won't take those animals to Colorado because those animals are likely to be more involved in depredation kinds of issues.
We're not going to take a bunch of busted wolves, is what they're saying. Oregon will let us have up to 10 of them. CPW says they plan to release some of them by the end of the year in Summit County, Eagle County, Grand County. Chris Bianchi, this is terrible. I'm just picturing, some state trying to pawn off all their one-eyed, toothless wolves on us, which is not what we're looking for. But yeah, when he says depredation, a wolf that can't hunt big animals is likely to grab somebody's dog or whatever, or take after livestock. So it makes sense that they would want healthy wolves. But you also understand how the farmers and ranchers out west feel about not wanting any part of this,
Yeah, I'm sure they're not thrilled about this. I'll say this, Kyle. I had no idea there was so much behind all this. Just reintroducing wolves seemed, I don't know, admittedly kind of easy to me. And Seems way more complicated than I would have thought.
Well, you've never clearly gone and picked up wolves from another state, Chris.
I have not done that. I will say this, though, Kyle. It is going to get cold. I'll see myself out. Nah, I'll do the weather. All right, so the most Colorado weather you'll see. On Thursday, it's going to be 64, and then Friday, 18 degrees, and it is going to be snowing. All right, warm and dry for tomorrow. Windy on Thursday, snow and cold for us. Coming up on Friday, classic Colorado weather, right? But for tomorrow, beautiful, 68 degrees, mostly sunny. It does turn breezy for us in the foothills, especially in the afternoon, and then into the evening with those temperatures. It is going to be gorgeous out there. Lots of sunshine, temperatures upper 60s, near 70 degrees for most of us. But high wind watch for the foothills and the higher peaks for tomorrow night and into Thursday. That's where we could be talking about wind gusts up to 75 miles an hour. That's out ahead of our next storm system. This one arrives as we get into our Thursday with a cold front and much colder weather and some snow for us coming up on our Friday. We could be talking about a few inches of snow here in town. I think it's Friday night's commute that will be the most concerning. Stays chilly into Saturday.
Hanukkah is a festival of freedom. So I think that those themes are amplified this year for everyone around the world who celebrates Hanukkah.
The Festival of Lights comes at a dark time for many in the Jewish community. Faith leaders here say their holiday and their history is all about overcoming adversity. Thursday evening marks the beginning of Hanukkah, Jewish Festival of Lights. With war between Israel and Hamas and rising anti-Semitism, Jewish leaders here say the holiday holds special meaning.
This is a time of great darkness for the world, particularly for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people. And so we look to the light of the Hanukkah menorah as hope that there will be light in the future at a very dark time. There were Hellenized Syrians under the leadership of a general by the name of Antiochus. They conquered the capital and of Jerusalem. They took the sacred temple and they made it a shrine to Greek gods. The Maccabees rebelled. It was a 3-year rebellion, and they purified the temple and reconsecrated it. There was a miracle that happened because in order to consecrate the temple, you needed sacred oil. They only found a small cruse of oil, but it burned for 8 days, which allowed them to rekindle the sacred fire in the temple. This is one of the few times in history when we had an external force and come and take over the temple in Jerusalem, defile it, and the indigenous Israelites, the Jews, came, rededicated the temple, and took it back. But this is a time of great pain for the people of Israel, and also, of course, for the Palestinian people as well. So it's a time, I would say, when the state of Israel is fighting back, of course, but also is in mourning because there are still over 160 hostages held in captivity in Gaza. We don't know what their fate is. So everywhere you go in Israel, people are aware of the fact that there are people who are not free. And Hanukkah is a festival of freedom. So I think that those themes are amplified this year for everyone around the world who celebrates Hanukkah.
We return with your feedback next. Smart question from Kevin Trujillo, who says, does the city of Denver offer the hotels a better contract to house the migrants than what they would get for housing vulnerable people? He said it would be a real bummer if it was fiscally advantageous for them to kick people out. Kevin, we've asked that. We've asked, is Denver paying the going rate? Are they paying more? Are they paying less? The city's got to know that a stable source of taxpayer dollars is going to be a lot more attractive to these hotels than money from people who are living on the edge. If Denver's serious about avoiding putting people on the streets, that's got to mean everybody.